So, in my last video, I discussed 10 great reasons to start a web agency, but starting a business is not for everyone. And so to keep things balanced, in this video, we're going to look at 10 reasons not to start a web agency. Hi, thanks for joining. If you're new to this channel, I'm Rich Dean, a web designer and developer, former web agency owner and author of the book series Start, Grow and Sell Your Web Design Agency. My goal is to help anyone looking to start, grow and sell an agency to save time, earn more money, avoid the common mistakes and pitfalls, and build a thriving and valuable business. Number one, your baby needs constant attention. I think when many people think about starting their own web agency, they want it to be this lifestyle business, something that can work around them and give them a better work-life balance than when they were employed. I think a lot of people also imagine creating a business that can be self-sufficient, something that can run on autopilot without too much involvement. Now, both of those things are possible, and I'll talk about this in my book series, but they can also take a lot of hard work to get there. And what most business owners find is that their businesses usually need constant attention. I think when you run a business, it can be incredibly hard to switch off, especially if your business is relatively new, or if you're going through a busy period, or if it's just you and your business. You'll want to keep your clients happy, but this means it can feel like you're constantly at their beck and call. I remember when I first started my agency, and especially when it was just me at the start, I found it really hard to switch off. Even going on holiday with my family was hard as there was nobody else to run the business, so I still had to deal with client emails. And even when I grew a team, it took years to get to the point where I could take a holiday without worrying about things like whether there were any issues or whether there was anything that needed my attention. Now, there are ways around this. You can put in place systems and processes and procedures to make your business more automated, but you may still find that running a business doesn't quite give you the freedom that you thought that it would. Number two, there's a lot of risk. I think this is something that a lot of people underestimate when they think about starting a web agency, and it's the same for all businesses. Now, it's true that creating websites isn't as dangerous as something like dangling off the top of a skyscraper, cleaning windows, or handling toxic waste, but there are still inherent risks, especially if you employ people. What if there's a problem with a client's website and they decide to sue you? What if an employee gets injured or decides to take you to an employment tribunal? Now, there are ways that you can protect yourself and your business, and I would always recommend things like seeking professional and legal advice and having robust insurances and legal documentation in place. But some of these risks are not always obvious, and they may not become apparent until you're a few years into running your web agency. This is definitely not something that you should bury your head in the sand about. There are risks to running any business, and some of them can have stiff financial consequences if you get it wrong. It's also a misconception that these kinds of risks are just limited to the business. As a business owner, you will also have responsibilities, so it's worth taking the time to understand this before you get too far involved. Number three, there is a lot of responsibility. As well as those risks that I just touched on, being a business owner means that you'll also have a lot of responsibility. You'll ultimately be responsible for everything that happens in your business. Even if you employ people, if something goes wrong or there's a problem with their work, your clients will still see you as the one who is responsible, as you were the one who chose to employ them. That may not always feel fair, but it's just part of running a business and the responsibility that goes with it. I don't think that this is necessarily a bad thing either. One of the best things about running a business is the autonomy and control that can go with it, but you'll just need to understand that with that control comes responsibility. When things go well, as a business owner, you'll benefit. But when they don't go well, I think it's just as important that you hold your hands up and accept that you're the one who's in charge. Just before we move on to the next point, please don't forget to like and subscribe, as this will really help us out. So, number four. It can take up a lot of your time. We kind of touched on this in the first point, but running a business can take up a lot of your time. Again, there are ways that you can reduce this, and I think it's really important that you systematize your business so that you can remove repetitive tasks and be more efficient overall. But for a lot of new business owners, I think it can be surprising just how many things there are to do and just how much time it all takes. In fact, I think a lot of people who go from being employed to starting a business do it because they want a better work-life balance, but they actually find their business becomes more demanding and takes up more of their time than if they had just stayed in their jobs. I think we live in this society where it's kind of become accepted that if you run a business, or if you just want to be successful in general, you need to work really hard and work really long hours and sacrifice time with family or friends. I think that's really sad, but this is also something that happened to me, especially when I was in the early years of running my business and when I was still figuring things out. Number 5, it's not easy to switch off. Again, I touched on this earlier, but when you run a web agency, it can be really hard to switch off. To be fair, I don't think this just applies to business owners. I think plenty of employed people also find it hard to switch off. But I'm someone who worked on both sides, and I can say that when I ran my business, I found it a lot harder to switch off than I ever did when I was an employee. We live in a world of constant communication and stimulation, and while I think that's great in some areas, it can make it a lot harder to switch off. I think this can be especially true if you work from home, where the boundaries between your work life and your personal life are a lot more blurred. I used to find that when I was employed and working in London, even when I had a really stressful day, because I used to commute to work on the train, I would have that hour or two journey home where I could just listen to music or read a book. And this really helped to create this kind of buffer or way to separate my personal life from my work life, to the point that when I got home from work, my mind was pretty clear of work stuff. But all the times that I've worked from home, I find it a lot harder as I don't have that same buffer. I find it harder to just stop work in general. And then there's always that temptation to quickly check my emails or log back onto my computer just to get something done. Number 6, the deeper you go, the harder it can be to exit. This is something that I think a lot of people don't appreciate until they're a few years into running their business. But the longer you run it for, the harder it can be to unravel everything so that you can exit if you want to. I think the best way that I can explain what I mean by this is to give you two different scenarios. So if I think back to when I was very early in running my agency, maybe only a few months in, at that point, it probably would have been quite easy for me to exit if I had wanted to. I didn't have any employees, so I wouldn't have had to worry about things like severance pay or winding down their employment. And I wouldn't have worked with too many clients, so it would have been relatively easy to let them know that I was closing my business down. I also wouldn't have had too many subscriptions or other ongoing costs to worry about. I still would have had to make sure things like taxes were all paid up, and I would have needed to finish any projects I was working on. But apart from that, if I wanted to close down my business and exit, it would have been relatively easy. If I compare that to when I was a few years in and I had grown my agency, it would have been a lot more complicated. I would have had a lot more client relationships to manage, and as I had employees, I also would have had to go through the complex process of letting them go. Not only would that have been heartbreaking on a personal level, it would have also been quite complicated and expensive. There would have been other commitments too, like subscriptions, ongoing projects, websites that we hosted, and even the lease on our office. Now, fortunately, this was never something that I did or had to worry about. I eventually sold my agency to new owners, but if I did have to go down this route, it would have been very expensive and complicated. I don't think many people realise this when they're thinking about starting a business, but exiting a business can be really difficult and certainly a lot harder than being an employee where you can simply hand in your notice and be gone a few weeks later. Number 7, it can consume you. When a business is running well, it can be such a good feeling. It can be one of the most enjoyable things that you can experience in your professional life. But when your business goes through a bad patch, it can also be really stressful. It can literally consume you to the extent that you can't stop thinking about it and where you get very little enjoyment out of your life. This is something that I went through personally when I ran my web agency. Fortunately, I didn't experience too many really difficult periods, and overall, running my web agency was one of the best things that I've ever done. But there were a couple of times that were really challenging and where all I could think about was my business and how I could keep it going. My family, friends, personal life, it all went out the window, and I actually lost a lot of weight. I think for a lot of people, their business is who they are. It's not only their livelihood, it can be their entire sense of purpose and self-worth. So if things are going badly, it can be really difficult. Now, obviously, everyone is different and different people can handle stress differently. Some people can handle stress better than others, and it's also something that I think gets easier over time. As you run your business and you go through more and more challenges, you tend to find that things get easier, and things that you found really challenging early on become less challenging as you progress. But running a business will probably always be challenging and stressful to some extent. Number 8, there's no guarantee of success. I think when we think of success and when we see someone who is successful or who has created a successful business, we tend to think that it was easy or quick. This is something called the iceberg theory of success, and it basically means that, like an iceberg, we only see the sort of 10% or so that is on the surface. What we don't see is everything that is below the surface, all the hard work that went into that success. For every success story you see, there are usually dozens of failures that we don't see just because they're not mentioned. I think because of this, many people who think about starting a business also think that it will somehow be easy or that success is automatically guaranteed, but it's not. In fact, unfortunately, more businesses fail than succeed. Running a business is hard work, and even then, even if you do everything right, there's still no guarantee of success. Number 9, it can be a thankless task. One of the things that you'll find when you run a business is that even if you try your hardest to keep everyone happy, it's actually really hard. And I don't think you will ever be able to make everyone happy. Employees will tell you when they think something's wrong or if they're not happy with the work that they're doing. Clients will tell you if they think that your costs are too high or if things aren't being done quickly enough or that the work isn't what they're expecting. So running a business can be a thankless task. But try not to beat yourself up over it too much, as it's just part of being a business owner. Clients will always have high expectations, employees will always think that things could be done better, but they also don't know all the difficult things that go on behind the scenes to make a business operate. The important thing to remember is that when you run a business, you're not really doing it for thanks or praise. When things go well, you'll probably benefit the most from your business. So you need to also be selfless and accept that being the one who's responsible also means that you need to be open to other people's criticisms. Number 10. You have to wear many hats. Again, we kind of touched on this earlier, but I think one of the things that surprises a lot of new agency owners is just how many different things there are to do. This is especially true for small businesses and sole outfits. If you're the only person in your business, like I was when I first started, then you'll probably need to do everything yourself. You'll need to design and build the websites, but you'll also need to do all the other stuff like marketing and sales, quoting for work, sending invoices, managing the business's finances, managing clients, and a lot more. Now, obviously, you can outsource some of this or bring people in to do it for you, but you might not be able to do that straight away. And so it can sometimes feel like a never-ending list of things that you need to get done. But to be honest, that's also what makes running a small business so fun and exciting. So if you've enjoyed this video, then please don't forget to like and subscribe, as it really helps us out. I also talk about this and many other topics in my book series, Start, Grow and Sell Your Web Design Agency. And you can buy that on Amazon now, so I'll share the link in the description below. And if you've not watched my other video where I talk about 10 great reasons why you should start a web agency, then you can watch that here. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.